I'm the general manager here at EVA. We do registration and virtual conference platforms, and we've learned a lot through our journey working with various clients, nonprofits and associations in their, whether it's in person or virtual conferences. So we're glad to be here today and share with you what we've learned and hopefully learn something from you along the way. Now, everyone will be muted during this webinar, but feel free to put your questions or share your stories in the chat box, or even use the Q&A feature to ask your question. So let's get started. Today's session is about online security for your event registration. This is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so we want to make sure that we cover a very important topic to keep not only the data that you host in the system, in your own AMS CRM system safe, but also within your event registration platform or your virtual conference platform. You may be integrating or exporting information into that into your third-party system, and you would just want to make sure that the data that your attendees and registrants are giving you are safe and secure. So today we'll be going over several topics. We're going to refresh our memory of what GDPR is all about. It's been a while since we all put it into place and are following those practices. We know that we've got to keep that data safe and secure, and we've taken a lot of those strides, a lot of us in our own organizations, but it's not something you do once. It's something that you've got to keep top of mind throughout your meeting life cycle. We'll also go over your entire data ecosystem, all the places that you can possibly store and share data. We'll also talk about your identity provider and doing single sign-on, making it easy for your registrants to register as well as access their virtual conference platform. Let's also talk about your vendors. You're sending data over to them, so let's make sure your vendors are also GDPR compliant and also have the same level of security that you expect of your own organization. Also, GDPR, in the very beginning, when we were all learning about GDPR, we all learned about the opt-in, making sure that we have the right kind of consent on our registration form. So we'll do a little review over that as well. And then let's talk about data encryption. What data actually needs to be encrypted? What can you share? And how is that stored? We'll also talk about the storage duration. How long do you need to keep data? I have to admit, I'm a bit of a data hoarder. So I follow my own lessons and try to purge data when I need to. We obviously do that for clients, but on a personal note, just cleaning out those contacts that have been there since childhood. Need to clean those out, dust off the cobwebs. We also will talk about security breaches. You know, we don't like to think that it would happen, but let's be prepared for it. So let's talk a little bit about that towards the end of the session today. And then at the very end, after we've reviewed a few things, we'll go through an easy checklist that you can follow within your own organization to get ready for your next event. So you can have the peace of mind that you've got things safe and locked down. So let's get started. Now, when GDPR came about, there's all sorts of pieces of information in there and guidelines that you need to follow. So let's talk about security. This is about, it's the security of your system is not only about the actual association management system that you may use or your CRM that you may use. It's about all of the different softwares that you're using to host your data to do any kind of transactions. So in addition to your AMS, you've probably got an accounting system that processes invoices, credit card transactions. You've probably got a registration system to help you with registrations. And then if you've gone virtual this past year, you're also probably using a third-party system to do that. There are other applications as well, as you've got housing, but you want to take a look at all the security for all of those systems, because ultimately you as the key organization, as the holder of that information, will be responsible. So you'll need to do those checks. And as far as consent, you know, in the very beginning, we were all like, what? You have to get an opt-in, an explicit consent to get people's information. Yes, and that still exists. And there are different levels of consent that you can get. So first of all, you don't want to have the pre-check little box, the checkbox that we used to have and have it pre-checked no longer is allowed. So you want to make sure that box is empty and allow people to check it. You'll also want to take a look at the different types of consents that you want. Not only are they registering for your system, but are they agreeing to privacy policies? How do you share information with the exhibitors? And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. And then portability. What this means is this is the right to transmit data. So the registrant is giving you the right to send the information out in a secure way, but they also have the right to get access to their information at any time. So if someone was to call you up, a member, an event attendee, a registrant, to call you and say, look, I want to know how you've been treating my data, should be ready to have that information on hand. And of course, privacy. Privacy is important to all of us. And one of the things that GDPR states in its requirements is that you should be able to delete the person that's providing you with the data, the user, the attendee, should be able to delete their data at any time, stop sharing the information, stop processing, basically giving them ultimate control over what, how, where, and when their data is being used. And then access, making sure, again, that there's documentation and somehow you can communicate back out to your registrant about how their information is being used. But making that readily available to them. And then most importantly, no matter what size your organization is, you want someone who's responsible for the data, the security, and the process of it all. GDPR specifically calls this person a data protection officer. So whether you have someone that is in charge of data in your organization, if you're lucky to have that person, great. You can turn to that person to help you through this process. If you don't, you should nominate someone that's ultimately responsible in taking the responsibility of identifying what is the process of collecting data, how do we store it. When we're working with third-party vendors, like a registration company, are they following the guidelines that you've set for your organization? Having that one key person be responsible for it will help go through this process, keep you compliant, and keep your data secure as well. And just kind of have consistent policies. Well, let's talk about your data ecosystem. Now, we talked a little bit about how all these different places that you've got data stored in. You could have a community platform where members go and have different discussions, or where they keep up with their member profile. Then you've got your association management system or customer relationship manager platform. Something like a Salesforce, a Nimble, an IMAS system, basically where you host all of the data that you've collected for your members. And then having that information, whether it's a direct integration with your registration system, or if it's an export of data that you're putting into registration. Either way, it's considered a part of that ecosystem. And then all of the other things that you've got going on, other platforms, you've got speaker management, perhaps your email marketing tool, mobile apps, exhibitors, how you share information with exhibitors and sponsors, accounting, websites. So there's so many different silos that are going here. And depending on how sophisticated you want your system to be, those systems can be integrated, but no matter whether they live alone, these systems live separately of each other, are integrated by an API, or you're importing, exporting data, you still have to be concerned about how that security is. What are those privacy? What settings are being set? So make sure you're looking at all of the different platforms that you are interacting with. Now let's talk about it. Talk about identity providers. Now we hear a lot about single sign-on, SSO. So if you've done any type of online shopping, you're probably accustomed to going and signing on that platform with your Google ID or your Facebook, your LinkedIn. That's called an identity provider. Those companies basically say, okay, you log into, let's say it's LinkedIn, you log into LinkedIn, and LinkedIn's going to verify that your account is valid, and they're going to send over some basic information that you control. And then you can open up, let's say it's your Amazon account. And then your Amazon account, then you have that's your gateway to get into Amazon. Well, the same thing can work for your registration system. You can have an identity provider, and that can be anything, again, from your AMS system, like an IMS, a Fontiva, a Salesforce, or even a social media platform like Facebook or LinkedIn. Somewhere where people can go and sign on, and they put in their information, and that information gets validated, sent back to the registration system, and says, okay, this person can have access to the registration system and continue on their registration journey. I like this a lot. This, to me, is the probably one of the most secure ways to go about setting up your registration system. The reason I like it is you've already gone through the process of setting security requirements and your GDPR compliance with your own organization. You've already gone through that practice. You set it in place, and let's say you are using your AMS. That system's already been audited, you know it's secure. So you're essentially using that system for people to log in. They're using that same password, the same account information. They're using the system that you've already deemed as secure. And in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what that process is in terms of the single sign-on and the validation. But what I wanted to make a point here is that the security there is in place. So you know you've already taken the first step in making sure your registration system is going to be safe, step one. Also, how many times have you gone into logging into an account and you're like, oh my gosh, what email address did I use? What password did I use? You're going to eliminate that. Instead of introducing your registrants or your attendees to a whole new account system and having to create a new account, you're giving them what they already are using. So give them their membership portal, have them use their existing email address, their existing password to access all of these great new tools that you're going to give them. It's just going to make it that much easier for them to log into the system and go on to that registration journey. Now, if you have a more sophisticated integration where you're pulling in the data from your membership system, then you can even pre-populate fields. And that's a whole nother conversation, but that makes it that much easier and a user experience that a lot of people are already experiencing online when they're shopping. And to that point, it gives them faster access to that registration portal. It gives them less barriers to actually register. So you're going to see more people buying into just logging in quickly, getting their event registration, checking the registration, and checking out, and increasing the revenue that you're getting as well. And then this login process, it is unified. Creating that one process. We're all creatures of habit, no matter what generation you might be in. It's easier to remember one password, one experience, one online journey. So keeping that easy for your registrants just makes it that much more of an easier online experience for them. Password assistance. I'm always resetting my passwords. I don't know about you. But this, instead of having to figure out which system I'm trying to log into and what is that password, I know I belong to this particular organization. They have my password. I'm going to reset it with them. So it's just one place that I really have to figure out how to reset my password. And then the encrypted validation. Whenever you do an SSO, and we'll talk more about this on the next slide, everything's encrypted, which is something that GDPR requires, is that certain personal information, account information is encrypted and it's secured. It makes it harder for a hacker to get in and get that information. So identity providers, think about it, a great way to go. Depending on who your identity provider is, your AMS system, and who your registration system is, it could be a fairly inexpensive and easy application to put into place for your attendees to start off on the right foot, on the right experience for your conference or event. So let's talk about SSO. So that's single sign-on and how it works. Basically, what you do is you're going to land on your registration page or on your conference portal, and there'll be a login. Put in your username, put in your password. That username and password, while it may look like your conference site or your registration portal, it actually is connected to your identity provider or your AMS in the background. And so what that's going to do is the registration portal is going to take the information that was entered, encrypt that information, send it back to your AMS. And what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, I'm going to check this information, and either it's going to be verified, validated, or not. If it's verified, I'm going to send a code back to the registration system, say, hey, this person is good to go. They can continue on with the registration process. Now, if it's not, then a message will be sent back saying no. But the great thing here is you're not sending actual username and password through the backend through data. Since it's all encrypted, it's done in a secure manner. But all that done and said, so the verification comes in and your registration system should say automatically say, here you go, I'm opening the doors for you to continue on to your registration process. So that's kind of the down and dirty bit of SSO. Something I highly recommend, and most platforms these days offer that system. So definitely look more into it. Now, speaking of your registration system, here are some questions that you should definitely ask. Ask your registration vendor, what servers are they using? Where are they located? Are they, those are questions that your registration vendor should be able to answer very easily. Password security, what things are in place that the vendor is going to do? If the vendor is GDPR compliant, they will have an encryption process in place. Again, that's for not only in the system while it's being stored, but also when they're sending it back, like a validation system. But that also goes for any other data as well. And we'll get into what data should be encrypted later on in this presentation. But with that encryption, that's very important for certain pieces of GDPR. They're looking for things to be safe, secure, so that if hackers do get in, they're just seeing numbers and letters as opposed to the actual data that they're seeing. And SSL. SSL is just a security certificate that you can get on your site. If the site meets certain certifications for security, it will be SSL enabled. You want to make sure that especially when you're dealing with getting information, personal data, and also financial data like credit card numbers, you want to make sure that those pages are definitely SSL enabled. Also, plugins. It's very common for a lot of different software applications to use plugins and extensions. Now, you want to make sure that whatever plugins and extensions your third party is using, that they're updated, that they're secure, that they're being reviewed, but just understanding about the process behind the scenes of what does a company do when they're looking at those kind of things. And then analytics and monitoring. What is the company doing to make sure that they not only do the one-time check of saying, okay, we are GDPR compliant. What are they doing consistently to make sure that the data that they're storing and transferring for you is being kept secure? So you want to ask those kind of questions. Most companies will have that on hand and be happy to answer that for you. Now let's talk about registration forms. There are a few places that you want to think about getting explicit consent. That means having a checkbox where someone actually marks it off saying that they understand. Privacy policy is one of them. Making sure that your attendees understand that you are GDPR compliant and how. That's what your privacy policy will have. Terms and conditions, the same thing. Again, put that checkbox there, but make sure it's unchecked so they can check it off saying that they understand. And then sponsors and exhibitors. This one I am pretty particular about. Our sponsors and exhibitors love to get their hands on all of the lists, all the registration lists and the attendee lists. They want to know who is there so they can go and market to those people. That's why they're supporting us. And in order to do that, you need to make sure that you get permission from your attendees. Ask them the question, do you want to share your information with sponsors and exhibitors? Now, just because they've registered for the conference or event doesn't mean they give you explicit consent to share the information, unless that's specifically stated in your privacy policy. Better to be safe than sorry. Make sure you just put it out there. Say, do you want us to share this information? a lot of cases, a lot of people don't want to share their information. What I would recommend is make the case to your attendees, educate them on why it's important to be able to share the information. Most organizations we work with, the sponsors and exhibitors are the major financial reason why the conference can happen. And sponsor exhibitors are only going to keep supporting the organization as long as they can show return on investment, ROI. If they can't show that, they're going to stop supporting it and there won't be a conference. So kind of educating your attendees about the importance of sharing their information with exhibitors and sponsors is important. But not only saying why, but also how and what the expectation is. A lot of organizations will control how the list is being used. One-time use, email only, but different rules. But make those rules, share them with your sponsors, exhibitors, and educate your attendees. It'll make for a happier relationship to be able to share that information. And then, of course, subscriptions. Anytime you want to add anyone to a newsletter subscription, a blog, you need to get their explicit consent there as well. Now we talked about, filling out the form, and now you've got all this data. What data actually needs to be encrypted? Is it everything? Well, if you Google data encryption and GDPR, it will seem like you need to encrypt everything. And you could do that, but the most important things that you want to remember are 3 different categories: the personal information, the financial information, and the health information. For personal, make sure the first and last name is basically for personal. You want to make sure that the information cannot identify that person. So if a hacker was to get in and get the information, they should be able to be able to tell who that person is. So definitely, and this is not an exhaustive list. This is just kind of a list. If I was, as a meeting planner, the things that I'd want to make sure that either A, I don't collect, or that I make sure it's encrypted. Of course, I need first name and last name to create my name badges and let people know who they are, but I'm going to have that data encrypted. Some people like to ask date of birth, just to kind of get a sense of demographics, age groups. If you're going to do that, make sure that's highly secure. That kind of information can be easily used to go into identity theft, and we don't want that. Email and their address, those things as well need to be encrypted. Now, most database systems like an AMS or a CRM, especially like Salesforce, Fontiva, they're already built with this encryption in place. So you're good to go there. Where you need to be concerned is if you're using a Google form, if you're using spreadsheets to manage all of these data, you may not be compliant. So you may want to take a look at that and see what your risks are. Maybe get a consultant involved to help you better manage that data to make sure you're protecting not only your organization, but your attendees that are trusting you with their info. Financial is a big category, and most of us don't even get into collecting a credit card. The last thing we want to do is actually have somebody's credit card in hand or write it down. If you're doing, stop it. Don't do that. You most likely have an integration with a merchant processor, whether it be PayPal, Stripe, Authorize.net, a lot of them out there. When you collect the data, collect the credit card information on a form, that information the credit card number never gets stored. It's then encrypted, sent to the merchant processor, and they're simply sending encrypted data back saying whether it's approved or not. And that's with a secure integration with a merchant processor. So those are things that you're pretty safe if you've gone through one of those major processing companies out there and done an integration, probably safe. If you are collecting credit card or debit information or any kind of account information in a Google form or in a spreadsheet, even username, password, you're definitely not compliant, and you definitely have opened up your organization to a major risk. So definitely reconsider how you're doing that. Getting into the credit card transaction fees may seem like a lot, but think about the security that you're giving your attendees and your organization as well. Let's move on to health. I know this may seem like an odd one to put on a registration form, but I think in the last year with the pandemic, we've all been concerned about vaccinations and people's health, not only for their individual health, but also the health of the entire group that's attending. Some people have opted to collect the information themselves in their registration form. Just make sure that that information is encrypted. There is some debate out there whether you can collect vaccination information through because of HIPAA or not. Those are things you definitely want to reach out to your attorney and insurance company about what information you're allowed to gather and the risk associated with that. But then there are a lot of great third-party applications out there right now that collect this information, help you mitigate a lot of those risks, and kind of take the ownership of collecting that information and keeping it safe off of your plate as the organization and planner, and letting someone, let the third party take on that responsibility. So definitely make sure, again, look into the third parties that are doing this safely. It's like an insurance policy, right? You're taking the insurance of putting it in the hands of someone that'll keep it safe and taking the risk out of your hands. So definitely those are three big categories you want to take a look at. If you're going with a company that has a great reputation, has been doing this for a while, has great GDPR compliance and security compliance within their company, you're probably most likely going to be set. But I would still ask the question, what data is being encrypted? Make sure you have the information to be able to provide that information in case one of your registrants or attendees do ask. So let's go on to storage duration. I think I told you, I'm a bit of a data hoarder. I have to be smacked on my hands to make sure that I clean out my data. So GDPR, they kind of leave it a little vague here. So the data can be stored as long as you have a purpose for it. That can mean a lot of things. So think about if you have a member who's been a member for 20 years and how much member history do you need to keep? For event registrations, same thing. If you've been running a conference for a few years, how much data history do you need? Nowadays, especially with EVA, we've got a data analytics board, and we only keep that board available to clients for a certain amount of time, because at a certain point, the data that's being, the insights that are gathered in that data dashboard, it's going to go stale after a while, and there's no use for it. So we definitely have some storage policies in place, but that's something that you will want to definitely think about. How long do you need the data? How long do you need the insights? Believe it or not, you can have insights without having to hang on to the storage, right? So, but those are things that definitely, to be GDPR compliant, to keep your data secure and safe, you want to consider and make part of your plan. All right, none of us like to talk about this, but what if a breach happens? If a breach does happen and you don't have a plan, it's panic buttons everywhere. You're trying to figure out what to do in probably the worst possible moment. Very much like the pandemic. The pandemic happened, for meeting planners that had in-person events, and then all of a sudden we're having to cancel events, reschedule events. If we didn't have a plan in place of what to do to reschedule or to cancel that event, it was a lot of scrambling around. Nobody ever thought that that would happen. And we've all learned very valuable lessons and now have plans in place. But the same thing applies for your data security. Plan for the worst case scenario. So think about, how do you go about finding where a breach starts? Do you have backup data? Where does that go? How do you go about searching for what the problem is? How do you go about fixing those errors and creating a secure location? And then the toughest part is informing those that were affected. What is the communication plan that you have for registrants and attendees to tell them, what, we had a breach and this is what happened. This is how we're fixing it. And this is how we're going to protect it in the future. I think many of us have been on the other side on the retail side of having a credit card that may have had a security breach and getting that letter in the mail or email to saying, your Your account may have been compromised, but here's what we're doing. Same kind of concept. You just want to make sure that that communication plan is in place and ready to go, so you don't have a delay in communicating out to the people that were affected. I know this is like horrible stuff to talk about, but it's something that you have to think about. Now that's kind of the data end of it, right? Like the security piece of your systems. But how many times have you been on site at an event and someone leaves their credit card? Or you have staff members sharing passwords? Or do you know if your hotel Wi-Fi is secure? And then what about the temps that you've hired to work registration and they're collecting credit card information? Have you done a background check? All of those things go into part of your plan, not only for plan for security, but also your security breach plan. Make sure that you have policies about if someone does leave a credit card, who stores that information? How do you communicate to the person that got it, that lost their credit card? Sharing passwords, never a good thing. And then hotel Wi-Fi. There are ways to make Wi-Fi at hotels more secure, and also the systems that you've got connecting to it. Do you need your registration system connected to the public Wi-Fi that everybody else is using? Probably don't want to do it. But those are the kinds of things you want to think about, just to jot. Again, not an exhaustive list, but things to get you started to think about the future. Now let's talk about your checklist. We talked about a lot of different things, but here's kind of a quick checklist that you can go as a planner. You don't need to be an expert at all of it, but you do need to know where you can go and get more information, whether it's your own organization or a consultant or your vendor that you're using. These are places you want to go. So first, your data protection officer. Make sure someone in your organization is the owner of all things data security, and work with them to create your data policies and know what those are. What data are you collecting? Is it encrypted? Just make sure that those policies are set in place and you know what's happening. Again, you may set it once. It may need to be revisited every now and then, not every day, but you want to make sure at least they're in place and there is a process in place to take and revisit those periodically. And your registration form compliance. You always, every time I create a registration form, I'm always double checking it, triple checking it, making sure we've got all the right pieces in place and that we've got the opt-ins, the privacy policies, the sharing policies, all of that information there, kind of having that checklist and going through that and not taking it for granted, right? Every time I create one, I go through that list. So that's something you definitely want to put on your to-do. And your vendor security. No matter how much you've worked with someone and how much you trust them, for every event, you want to ask the questions, has anything, what are your security policies? Has anything changed? What are you doing to keep up with it? Those conversations are good to have. Again, it's just that planning in case a breach happens, you at least already have that information as a starting point for finding out where a breach could or did happen. Then your data exports. So be very careful on how you export data, where they're going, where they're saved. Saving your data spreadsheets to your desktop is probably not the most secure place to put it. Talk again with your data protection officer about some guidelines about how data can be shared, where it can be stored, what are some of those expectations. And then data architecture. I know this may seem like a weird one to put on the checklist, but definitely understand what data points you're collecting, where are you collecting them, where are they being stored, and what systems are talking to each other. You'll want to know what data you're sharing from your registration system to your virtual conference system. Again, this is good to help you with your analytics down the road, but also from a security standpoint, just knowing, again, you're responsible for making sure that you have that information available to your registrants and attendees. So make sure that you've got it documented somewhere. If someone asks you, you say, yep, I got the information and here it is. But quite honestly, it'll help you with the analytics. So I highly recommend doing that. Now I know we can go on talking hours on each topic that we covered today, but hopefully this was a good starting point for you all. I know most planners already do a lot of these things, but it's great to have the refresher. And when it comes to other people's data, we want to make sure that we're doing all that we can to keep it safe. So we'll have the presentation available to you. We'll also have some tip sheets. And if you have any questions about data security, we're happy to answer them myself. And if I don't know, I go to my data security officer and ask him the questions. So definitely reach out to us if you have any questions, but we hope that you have a not only this month for Cybersecurity Month, but you all year round are safe and secure with all things security related, data related, and hope you enjoy the rest of the year. Thank you.